Hello once again, I'm Extra Life, and this is my computer desk. It's a mess, which it usually is, but I make no apology for that. That's what it's for. But there's a couple problems with this desk that have been bothering me more lately. Namely, the ergonomic ones. It's too tall. Even with my chair at the highest setting, I still have to raise my shoulders and my elbows to be able to use the keyboard comfortably. Also, the desk is not very deep, so there's not really much room for a full-size MIDI controller, and I have to use this teeny tiny one instead. Plus, the surface of the desk is really rough and more or less straight off a sawmill, and they put some finish on it, and it's kind of difficult to clean. So today I'm going to replace this with a studio desk that I've built, and I copied it from the Platform Desk by Output, which is an audio software company, and they make a studio desk which is very nice.
Here's the website for the Output Platform Desk, and you can see they show it off with a couple different configurations. Its main features are that it has a nice shelf where you can set your computer monitor and your studio speakers, as well as some rack space underneath that for audio gear. It's got some cable management as well. It comes in a couple different finishes, although if you add the dark finish and the keyboard tray, it does increase the price a little bit. I think it's still very reasonably priced. They do provide a set of drawings with dimensions when it's assembled, which is all we really need to get going. Although I have to give a big shout out to Richard DiZerega, a fellow YouTuber, who made a video a while ago about how he built his own Output Platform Desk with angled racks, and he provides some measured drawings as well, and you can go look those up. They're very handy if you happen to be able to get 5 foot by 5 foot plywood sheets, and as you'll see, I had to get 4 by 8 sheets, so I had to roll my own. As usual, I'm doing this project out in the patio of my apartment building where I don't have a wood shop, so my first project was to make a guide for my circular saw since I don't have a proper table saw. And you do this by taking a thin piece of wood and bolting it on top of a wide piece of wood, and then taking one long rip cut down its entire length using the bolted on piece as a guide for the foot of the circular saw, and this will produce a flush track or guide, a little bit like a track saw, so that you can make flush cuts very easily without a whole bunch of clamping. Once the guide is ready, we can start taking measurements and marking out the dimensions for the desk side pieces, which are the large parallelogram shaped pieces which hold up the top shelf. When you're using a saw guide like this, it's important to make sure that you lay the guide right along the measured line and you run the saw on the outside of the line so that the piece you're cutting ends up the dimension you want and not shy by one saw width. Once we've finished one side, we can simply use it as a template to mark out the other, which is exactly the same shape. Then we can get started cutting out the legs, which are the trapezoid-shaped pieces which hold up the desktop itself, and they are laminated together from 2 sheets each of 3/4 inch plywood, forming a total width of 1.5 inches. And as before, all we have to do is cut out one, and then we can use it as a pattern to cut out 3 more. These are just laminated together using regular wood glue, but it's a very large surface area, so it's important to spread it out thinly and evenly, and use lots of pressure when clamping them together. Now we're ready to cut out the top shelf of the desk, and although overall this has a very angular appearance, it's in fact the only miter cut that we need to make on the whole project. And it's made at an angle of 30 degrees from vertical, which makes the front face of that shelf parallel with both the dividers and the sides. Next, we can cut the desk top down to size, as well as ripping the laminations lengthwise that will go underneath it to reinforce it and thicken the top a little bit. I made the front and back strips 3 inches wide and the sides 1.5 inches wide so that they would sit flush with the supporting legs of the desk. When cross-cutting smaller sections, I made sure to use a fine-tooth handsaw to avoid the tear-out you might get from using the circular saw. Now it's time to start the loudest piece of construction, which is always using the router. Here I'm setting up a flush cut bit, which has a guide bearing that rides along perpendicular to the work and lets you cut a perfectly parallel surface. Here we're using it to clean up the laminations on the sides as well as the desktop. Next, I grabbed some scrap lumber and used it to make a guide template for the cable cutouts in the desktop. By clamping on some fences, we can create ourselves a perfectly square cutout using the router, and then we can use that square cutout as a template to make a set of identical cutouts in our actual work surfaces. After drilling a pilot hole for the bit, we simply use the flush cut bit to guide along the edge of the template and create the same cutout in the piece below. Once we've made 3 cutouts in one of the pieces, we can use that piece as a template for the others. Off camera, I've also cut out the wedge-shaped top shelf and keyboard tray supports, one of which I'm using here to mark out the rabbet in the sides that will accept the top shelf. And we'll use a fence on the router to make that an exact width. This rabbet should be exactly 3/4 inches wide and 1/4 inch deep, which will accept the top shelf and support it neatly. Here I'm cutting out the dado in the bottom of the top shelf, which will accept those aforementioned supports. And this has to be 19 1/4 inches away from the sides to account for the depth of that rabbet that we just cut out and fit 19-inch rack gear between the supports. I didn't have a 3/4 inch bit, so I had to very carefully adjust the width of it and make multiple passes. Here I am marking out the curve at the front of the keyboard tray, which is mostly for comfort and aesthetic purposes, and I do that by finding the center and then marking a point on a line perpendicular to the edge of the tray, and then with a pencil on a string, marking out a circular curve along the front, and then ferrying out those curves with additional circular arcs from the corners. It took me a couple tries to get this right, so just go by eye and do what looks good to you. When I was satisfied with the way it looked, I used the router and a 1/4 inch bit to freehand the curve, going purely by eye, and I took very shallow passes to reduce the forces involved and make it easier to trace out the curve. Then I used a 3/8 inch roundover bit to chamfer the bottom edge of the keyboard tray, which is where you're probably most likely to bang your knees if you happen to be sitting too close, and I did the same on the bottom front edge of the desktop for the same reason. The keyboard tray also gets a glued-on bottom support to prevent it from bowing in the middle since it's only fastened at the edges, as well as a piece of back trim to prevent you from losing any pens you might happen to set on it. After that, I cleaned up my router handiwork with the palm sander, and then smoothed out some of the edges on the desk and elsewhere on the project that I thought needed it. Next, it was time to build up the leg assemblies, in other words, bolting the sides of the desk to the legs. And this is a little bit tricky because they don't have any common edges to align things to. So what I did was kind of make a jig from a sheet of plywood and some extra stock. And the idea is that you make sure that the bottom and top are both parallel, and then you align each of the corners so that they line up in the back and the front. And in doing so, I discovered that I had actually cut the legs of the desk a little bit too long. Once I had fixed that, the idea with this jig is to set the side of the desk so that its bottom is parallel to the ground, and then clamp in place one of the dividers so that it overhangs that rabbet by 1/4 inch. Here I'm using a drill bit, and that 1/4 inch is the depth of the dado that the top will accommodate this. Then you have some stock that makes up the width or the depth of the desktop itself, and you can use that to offset the leg and make sure that it is parallel to the top shelf. Then you simply slide the leg forward or back until it is parallel with that corner, and therefore it is lined up with the back of the top shelf. Then you can mark those places so that you don't lose them, and drill the holes to attach. The next sub-assembly to build up is to screw the modesty panel onto the back of the legs, and this is actually quite straightforward, as long as you do it on a flat surface and make sure that everything is square. Finally, we are ready for finish. Because this is Baltic birch plywood, which is a wide-grained and relatively soft wood, I used some pre-stain conditioner to even out the appearance of the stain on this surface, which would otherwise actually be quite blotchy and sort of unpleasant looking. Next, I applied a layer of stain on all of the surfaces with a brush, but it really doesn't matter how you apply it, just wipe it on, let it sit for a little while, and then wipe it off. And if you like, you can let it dry for 24 hours and then apply another coat, which is what I did on all of the visible surfaces, so the desktop, the keyboard tray, the sides, and the dividers. I want to say a big thanks to my friend Ben, who stopped by and helped me apply that second coat. It actually went a lot faster having a second set of hands on the job. For some reason, it always takes a lot longer to do finish than I think it will. The next day, I applied some shellac, which is tree resin, secreted by the lac bugs of India and Thailand. And it has a very strange smell, but it's actually very easy to work with. You apply a very thin coat and it dries extremely quickly, so make sure not to let any of it pool. But it leaves a very nice, lustrous, and shiny surface, and like I said, it dries very quickly, so not that difficult to work with. And once this finish is all dry, we are finally ready to put this desk together and get it set up in our studio.
And in order to do that, first we have to do the unthinkable and unplug everything. desk, which is a great deal more ergonomic and provides a lot more real estate for studio gear. I think it looks a lot better than my old desk. It's certainly a lot easier to clean. But overall, I think it came out really well. It's really solid. Would I recommend building this output platform desk at home? I suppose that depends. I mean, if you're set up, you've got a wood shop, particularly if you've got a table saw, it wouldn't take you all that long if you've got a truck to move some plywood around. But, you know, for the product that they're offering, the price they've got it at is really fair. I probably spent, you know, around $300 in materials. This Baltic birch plywood is about $60 a sheet, and I had to buy, you know, some drawer slides, some hardware. I had to buy a router bit. It certainly was cheaper than buying it online, but I did have to spend a lot of time doing it, and particularly with my setup where I've got to, you know, haul my tools up and down a set of stairs. And I guess I sort of didn't realize how big a desk is when you sit down to actually have to hand finish it and sand it and things like that. But if you have a shop and if you like building things, which I do, even though I don't have a proper shop, then I think it is definitely worth the time. It's not that difficult a project. It looks intimidating because there's angles that are not 90 degrees, but ultimately you can make those measurements with you know, a carpenter's square and a ruler and a tape measure. So I really enjoyed this process. I hope you enjoyed that look into putting this thing together, and I'm looking forward to using this thing for many years to come. Oh, and one last thing before I go, I wanted to let you know that I've started a page over on Patreon. Patreon is a subscription service platform for content creators of all kinds, whether you're making videos or podcasts or, you know, writing novels. And what you can do is head over there, click the link down in the description, and become a patron, and you'll get a little bit of bonus content, and you'll help support the channel and help me make more of these videos more frequently. Anyway, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed that project as much as I did, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.